The search for the answers to some of the biggest questions in life's history can take paleontologists pretty far off the beaten track. Today I talked to two paleontologists who are following their questions far south of the beaten track.
And there's also something surreal about prospecting and having a penguin near you.
We're headed to the bottom of the world in search of Antarctic dinos. My name's Matt Bortz, and this is Pastime. In early February of 2016, an international expedition of paleontologists set out for Antarctica to hunt for new fossils from the southernmost continent. Before they set out, I had the chance to talk to two of the paleontologists who were part of this expedition.
I'm Eric Warsack. I'm a PhD candidate in biological sciences at Ohio University in Athens, Ohio.
And I'm Pat O'Connor. I'm a professor of anatomy at Ohio University in Athens, Ohio.
Both Eric and Pat have a lot of experience hunting for fossils. Both of them have spent a lot of time working especially on dinosaur evolution. They're bringing their specialized knowledge to this larger international team of other paleontologists and geologists.
The Antarctic Peninsula Paleontology Project, or AP3 for short, and we are a group of people from a number of institutions around the world who are going down to conduct exploratory geological and paleontological research on the Antarctic Peninsula and islands surrounding it.
There are a lot of places in the world that still need to be explored by paleontologists on the hunt for fossils, but Antarctica is an especially massive problem, a big gap in our knowledge of what the world was like in the past.
We just don't know what's there. I mean, we have this basically a lost continent where we're only scratching the surface. We have no idea what's there. It's just covered in ice and snow and all kinds of harsh weather conditions.
So there is plenty to discover in Antarctica. The Antarctic Peninsula Paleontology Project chose to focus their attention and their questions on one specific slice of time that has dramatically affected the world as we know it. That is, the end of the Age of Dinosaurs 66 million years ago and the beginning of the Age of Mammals.
We know there was a big faunal turnover that took place, meaning things like non-avian dinosaurs and marine reptiles and a number of invertebrate groups that went extinct at the end of the Cretaceous, and then we see the radiation of different animal groups into the Cenozoic.
The Cenozoic is the last 66 million years of Earth's history. Its nickname is the Age of Mammals.
But the one thing that's really important here is the data that support this large faunal turnover is still predominantly northern hemisphere in origin.
That means that most of what we know about what was happening right up to the end of the Age of Dinosaurs and what was happening at the very beginning of the Age of Mammals is recorded in rocks that are found on northern continents, and most of that evidence is piled up in deposits found in North America.
It's not to say that we're doubting that took place at all. I think there are fairly solid data that would support that, but it's really a biased fossil record that supports it. And so going into the southern hemisphere, in this case, a high latitude locale like Antarctica, this is part of this much larger puzzle of what was happening globally at the end of the Age of Dinosaurs. Were things happening very similar in the northern and southern hemispheres? Were there differences?
In order to make these comparisons, the AP3 team, including Pat and Eric, needed to find rocks that were actually from the end of the Age of Dinosaurs. Fortunately, they weren't going in totally blind. The team could build off the work of geologists who had been to the area before them that had had different kinds of questions about the Earth's history in Antarctica.
Historically, there have been a number of groups, including Argentines, British, some Americans, who have done basic geological work in the area, just trying to characterize what the rock units are, what their approximate ages are. Much like when you go into any place that maybe is not as explored as, say, Western North America, oftentimes the geology community is in there in advance of the paleontology community. So they're doing basic geological characterization of the basin. And as part of that, they come across fossils, and then people like us get tuned into that and then develop projects like this.
Fortunately for paleontologists interested in the end of the Age of Dinosaurs, geologists did identify chunks of rock that were actually from this time period in Antarctica, in a very specific region of Antarctica called the Antarctic Peninsula.
If we were to run down the coast of Chile and jump off the end of South America, and we would jump across the Drake Passage and land on the Antarctic Peninsula.
Specifically within the Antarctic Peninsula, we'll be on the northern part of it, on the eastern coast in what's known as the James Ross Basin. The main island is James Ross, and then surrounding islands, including Vega Island, where we conducted research back in 2011, as well as some other islands.
As Eric mentioned, this actually isn't the first time the AP3 team has set out for the Antarctic Peninsula. They went out in 2009 and in 2011, but this 2016 field season is the longest chunk of time they've ever had to actually search for fossils on the Antarctic Peninsula. Both Eric and Pat have extensive experience hunting for fossils in some pretty remote corners of the Earth, but coordinating the expedition to the Antarctic Peninsula comes with a massive set of logistical problems and a very tight schedule.
People will converge in Punta Arenas, Chile, which is the southernmost, large city in Chile, where NSF.
The NSF is the United States National Science Foundation. The NSF's polar program is responsible for supporting a lot of the research that's done in Antarctica by American scientists.
Where NSF has a base, effectively not a base, but has a facility that operates into the peninsula, into the Antarctic Peninsula from there.
Part of the training and preparations and logistics in Punta Arenas that we do before we embark is getting the necessary provisions, getting the necessary food that we're going to eat for camping, as well as specific clothing and winter wear that they issue a bulk of it for us.
And we will all do some helicopter training, some other basic training with regard to setting up camps. And then we will embark on a ship called the Nathaniel Palmer. And it'll take approximately 4 days to transit from Chile down into the James Ross Basin, traveling through the Drake Passage, which rumor has it hosts some of the roughest oceans on the planet.
I think Dramamine.
After the 4 to 5 day transit into the basin, then it's a very kind of detailed and delineated schedule where we will basically take the ship into the area around Vega Island or in between Vega Island and James Ross Island, and then place 2 camps with our group. There's another scientific team who's focusing on paleomagnetism of the late Cretaceous rocks in that area. They will be placing 1 to 2 camps as well. So it's a fairly large-scale logistical operation. We know that there are a handful of sites that we want to put a dedicated group of people on the ground full-time to do nothing but explore there for about 12 days. Simultaneously or in parallel, there will be another group, a smaller group of people who will be ship-based and will be reconning in that general area. We'll reconvene kind of partway through the field season to look at what's happening in those field camps. If we're, hitting it in a big way, then we'll probably keep a field camp in there. If we're not, we have another set of localities that we want to go and place camps. And then the recon team could, throw a monkey wrench into all of this if they, find some completely new outcrop that's fossiliferous. So that could really change up the program for the second half of the field season.
If the weather holds.
And that's a very good point, Eric. I mean, all of this is...
we have to be flexible in contingencies here with what we want to get at.
So the plan is to have multiple teams of paleontologists, some working on site, others helicoptering from one place to another exploring for new sites. But what will they actually be looking at? What does this place actually look like?
Well, rocky, not much snow or ice. I mean, it really depends on the weather and what's it like when we get there. It changes rapidly. It can be very snowy, and we can get a foot of snow in the morning, but by afternoon time, the winds will just blow it away, and we can go out prospecting. But predominantly, it's just rocky. There's a lot of volcanics that we have to walk across just to get to some of the deposits. and we're close to the waters, so some beaches.
Sure, and I think that's kind of the big thing, because I think most people envision Antarctica as this thing with, kilometers of ice, and the peninsula is actually not as ice covered as most of the continent is. So we actually are getting fairly decent coverage on rocky terrain.
So it can go anywhere from the low teens to, I think last time I was there, about 40s, maybe low 50s. I was wearing a T-shirt, just walking
I would
around.
say there are days when you can prospect in a T-shirt, or a long sleeve outdoor shirt is actually quite comfortable and necessary.
Wait, my whole concept of Antarctica might be a little bit off here. So is the Antarctic Peninsula always warm enough to maybe rock a T-shirt?
No, not at all. So we're going, our expedition will kick off on the 8th of February, 2016, and that is getting toward the middle to the end of the austral summer. So, fast forward 5 to 6 months, and of course, that's going to be all iced in and fairly inhospitable for this kind of work, which is why we go during, the northern hemisphere winter.
Based on the work of geologists and previous work performed by the AP3 team, this year's expedition knows that there are fossils to be found.
There's plenty of marine animals or marine-based fossils poking out of the ground. It's a very fossiliferous area that we're going to be in. So it's not like we have to dig deep in order to find a little scrap. There are bones sticking out. There are marine invertebrates there that just stick out of the ground and are apparent. It's just a matter of specific fossils to find and collect.
Yeah, and that really, I guess, therein lies the trick for this group of researchers and students that we have, is that we're primarily interested in what was happening on the land as opposed to in the marine environment. So given the preponderance of marine animals that are there, we're still a little bit dealing with a bit of a needle in a haystack in trying to find those rare occurrences of terrestrial animals.
That means that some of the beds of sediment are preserving fossils that were deposited out at sea. Other sediments that are harder to find are preserving fossils that were deposited on land. The team's objective is to zero in on where those land-based fossils are coming from so they can figure out what was going on up on land at the end of the Age of the Dinosaurs. What did the seaside world look like at the end of the Cretaceous?
Definitely would be very seasonal, no doubt about it. Seriously, not tropical or subtropical, but also not Arctic.
As we see it today.
Yeah, very, very unlike what you see today.
What's kind of crazy about that is Antarctica, during the Age of the Dinosaurs, was still really, really far south.
It shifted a little bit since from the time that we're looking at in the fossil record, but it still would have had a fairly significant day to night shift throughout the year like we see now. So it was still relatively high latitude.
If it hasn't moved much, then what sent Antarctica into this deep freeze that we see it in today?
The big thing is the disconnecting of that Antarctic Peninsula from South America, which changed up the circulation of the ocean currents. Ocean currents can carry heat away from where it's warm.
After the connection between South America and Antarctica was broken, sometime between 25 and 40 million years ago, the ocean currents that were going along the coast of Antarctica started just looping around and around the continent instead of being diverted along the coasts of South America. With the ocean currents around Antarctica cut off from the rest of the world, all of that cold water sent the entire continent into a deep freeze.
Isolation and insulation.
Exactly.
The classic image of the paleontologist at work in the field is burrowed down in a quarry, like they're surrounded by bones, and they're slowly picking them out, maybe with dental tools and brushes. But that's not really what Eric and Pat and the rest of the AP3 team have signed up for. In going to the Antarctic Peninsula, they are looking for places where there are fossils, which means they're going to spend a lot of time just walking, looking at the ground, trying to find fossils. Which begs the question, how do you find a fossil? How do you know that you've found something that once belonged to an ancient organism and isn't just some useless rock?
I mean, part of it's luck and just being in the right place at the right time. Is something eroding out at this area and you just happen to walk by. The other part of that is, do you even notice it when you walk by? So really it's just getting that keen eye and just really covering as much ground as possible.
What Eric said, right place, right time is so much of this, right? Can you actually can you have a group of people looking at a given rock unit that represents a given time in Earth history? That's part of it, right? So everything has to come together to get that. And then, fundamentally, we're all anatomists by training. Some of us are actually anatomists at medical schools, and some of us are professors in geology departments. But the one thing that unites all the paleontologists on this is that we are all students of anatomy. And as Eric alluded to, you might see a small fragment of something coming out of the rock, and 9 out of 10 people might look at it and think it's just, oh, that's a cobble or another rock or something like that. But with the training in anatomical sciences, and specifically in the groups of animals that we all specialize on, that's really what we bring to this. So that's what informs our search image.
Yeah, that's the hard thing, is establishing that search image. Like, once you see what a fossil looks like in a given rock, like, you can go anywhere and a fossil will look different no matter what rock it's in, right? But the moment you notice that texture, that thing where it just says, oh, this is a bone, you can identify the color, the morphology to it, the size of it even, can help inform your search image. And then from there on, you're like, oh, there's one, there's one, there's one, there's one, there's one. So it's just getting that first bone, and everyone can just clue and be like, oh, it kind of looks like this.
And there are other factors at play. Sometimes, Eric alluded to color. Sometimes, some formations, the fossils are almost always extremely different in color, whether you're talking about bone or teeth, relative to the surrounding matrix. And that's great. That's your best case scenario for learning how to look for fossils. And then there are other formations where the color distinction is little to none, in which case now you're going basically just on shape.
So, the weather needs to cooperate. The logistics all need to fall into place. Multiple schedules and all these plans need to work together. And the team needs to get to the outcrop. Then they need to learn how to actually recognize fossils in unfamiliar rock. Then they can start collecting them. And what kinds of fossils are you hoping to collect?
It's really anything and everything that we want to find and collect. Really, you can't really predict what you really want. It's the surprises that are the best kind of collections that you want to go for.
That's the thing, is the team is made up. There are people who would be card-carrying dinosaur paleontologists, like Eric is a great example of that. There are people who are really bird-focused. There are people who are very mammal-focused.
Yeah.
But I think the one thing that the kind of shared vision, if you will, is that I think everybody, even though they have their maybe taxon of interest or their group that they specialize in, it's really putting that whole ecosystem back together. So take whatever we find in terms of fossils, of animals, of plants. I mean, we really haven't scratched the surface in terms of at least the terrestrial vertebrate diversity.
Pat and Eric, thank you so much for sharing your plans and expectations with Pastime. We're going to catch up with you on the other side of your expedition. What is the ideal discovery that you'd like to make before you come back to the North American continent?
Honestly, the ideal discovery, I want something unexpected.
Absolutely.
Like, I think that will just, throw another wrench, ask more questions, maybe answer one, but really, like, why is this thing here? I think a surprise finding would be really cool.
I think people are pretty psyched to go and basically get in on the rock, and you get this group on the rock looking for fossils. Anything we find is going to be fantastic.
By the time this episode is released, most of the team will have returned from Antarctica, but you can go back and look at their expedition adventures at www.antarcticdinos.org, or you can follow them on Twitter at Antarctic Dinos. They'll continue updating those both with information as they release more and more about what they discovered on their expedition, even after they get back home. And as always, remember you can follow us on Twitter at Pastime Paleo, or find us on Facebook at Pastime Paleo, where you can get information and updates from the world of paleontology. And don't forget to check out our website, www.pastime.org, for links related to this episode. And with that, we'll see you next time on Pastime.